Madam Chair, we're now live.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Community Affairs and Planning Committee meeting this evening. For those of you in our neighborhoods that are joining us, we appreciate you tuning in. Just want to let you know that due to the COVID-19 emergency, the meeting of the Community Affairs and Planning Committee is being held electronically and live streamed on the town's website. All members of council and town staff in attendance are participating by audio and video teleconference. For members of the public watching from home, please bear with us if we encounter any technical difficulties throughout the meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And in addition to that, both items on tonight's agenda were advertised as public meetings, and the notice was published in the Ajax News Advertiser, online on the town's website, and IMO platform, advising of the opportunity to participate by written or oral submission or by pre-registering with legislative services to speak during the electronic meeting. And we did not receive any written or oral submissions or requests to speak at tonight's meeting. So is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Being none? So I need someone to move the adoption of the minutes from March 2nd, 2020.
On.
Councillor Khan, Mayor Collier. And we'd like to go into our public portion of the meeting this evening, the Code of Conduct review, and I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Harris, who's our Acting Director of Legislative and Information Services.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, and thank you for having us here tonight to present the results of the comprehensive review of Council's Code of Conduct. I'm joined by Sarah Moore, Manager of Legislative Services and Deputy Clerk, and by John Mascarin, representing Airden Burles as the town's appointed Integrity Commissioner. We're all happy to answer any questions you may have after the presentation. This project was identified in Council's strategic plan for completion in 2020, and
Excuse me, sorry, point of order. Chair, we didn't actually vote on the
we didn't vote
adoption of the
on
minutes.
Oh, my mistake, I'm sorry. Okay, we had a mover and a seconder, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried, thank you.
Sorry, Alec.
Sorry,
Thank
Mr. Harris.
I'll continue. This project was identified in Council's strategic plan for completion in 2020, and we are pleased to be able to present the results of the review this evening. This presentation is going to give a very brief overview of the work that was undertaken and highlight the most significant recommended changes to Council's code, the local board code of conduct, and the complaints and inquiries procedure. Staff began their work by engaging directly with the town's Integrity Commissioner, who provided guidance on best practices among Ontario municipal codes of conduct. The IC provided us with sample codes developed from best practices in the sector, which staff used as a foundation to develop the new documents. And after the documents were drafted, the IC also reviewed those and provided additional comments and input. In addition to the feedback and guidance that we received from the Integrity Commissioner, staff facilitated a month-long public engagement campaign to solicit feedback on the current code of conduct and the complaints procedures, which was done through the town's IMO platform. Public consultation efforts included a survey on IMO, as well as social media messaging, newspaper ads, and email blasts throughout the month of July. Staff also undertook a scan of 16 municipalities in the GTA to compare their codes of conduct and complaints and inquiries procedures in order to research best practices and understand trends and new areas in codes of conduct within the GTA. So we received 31 responses to the survey on the IMO platform, all of which were from Ajax residents. This was about the level of feedback that we expected to receive. And I will say that generally speaking, topics like council accountability and transparency mechanisms don't usually generate a wide amount of interest, but they do provide a deep level of interest. And we were quite satisfied with the level of detail that was expressed in a lot of the responses we received. It is a topic that draws very specific interest, and the feedback we got was quite rich and informative. Over half of respondents expressed that the current code is easy to understand, but generally they believe that it does not hold current members of council accountable. Most respondents expressed that there should not be a time limit within which a complaint can be filed in relation to the code, and that council members quite generally should not be eligible to receive gifts or benefits. In addition to that, there were several themes that emerged through the survey comments. The code itself should be written in simple and clear language. The code should address social media usage in some way. The current complaints process is complicated and can sometimes be intimidating. And the code should generally align with the region of Durham's code where it's appropriate to do so. So using the information that we gathered from the research phase and the public survey, each section of the code was examined in detail and rewritten to reflect modern best practices. Many provisions have remained the same from the current code, but are now organized better and written more clearly. And in addition to that, several sections have been substantially updated, including gifts, benefits, and hospitality, communications and media relations, new provisions related to social media, and the complaints and inquiries procedure. And we'll get into each one of those in turn. So within gifts, benefits, and hospitality, language has been updated to provide clarity on the categories of gifts, benefits, and hospitality that a council member may accept. These categories have also been aligned with the regional code for consistency. Most significantly, council members will be required to disclose the value of gifts and benefits they accept, specifically relating to certain categories, being gifts or benefits that are given to members in recognition of their volunteering efforts for charitable or nonprofit organizations, food, lodging, transportation, and entertainment that's provided by another level of government to the member or when they're speaking at an event or a conference, an invitation from and at the expense of a private third party to attend a conference, seminar, charity fundraiser, reception, ceremony, cultural event, or other similar event where the proceeds raised are to support a not-for-profit or charity organization, provided that the member is not lobbied at that event, door prizes that may be won by a member at an event, and any other gift or benefit that would be deemed acceptable by the Integrity Commissioner for a member to receive and accept. Disclosure of gifts and benefits received in any of these categories that total over $300 from a single source in a calendar year would be required to be reported on a quarterly basis, and those reports will be posted on the town's website. And the idea here is that the timing would align with the quarterly reports on council's expenses. Communications and media relations is another section that went through a significant review. You might recall in June, council directed staff to expand and clarify the communications section of the code and to provide more detail as to how decisions of council are to be communicated. So with that in mind, this section was rewritten and now requires that members shall fairly and accurately communicate the decisions of council, even if they disagree with them, and shall do so in a respectful manner. Members shall adhere to the provisions of the town's media relations protocol. Members shall acknowledge and respect that decisions of council are typically communicated by council as a whole through the town's administration or by the mayor as the head of council. And when communicating in a formal capacity, members must not represent themselves as speaking on behalf of council unless they've been authorized to do so, either by council or by the mayor when they're representing the mayor. And where it could be reasonably thought by others that a member is speaking on behalf of council, members have an obligation to indicate that the opinions, views, or positions that they're expressing or advocating for belong solely to them and do not represent a council position. And lastly, when addressing the media, members shall not make disparaging remarks about one another, staff members, or members of the public. In addition to that, this section also now contains provisions related to social media. Social media was an area that was identified both by the Integrity Commissioner in the best practices review, as well as by survey respondents as something that should be addressed in the code. This is also a trend that we are seeing increasingly in the codes of other municipalities. A growing amount of official and unofficial town and council correspondence and public interaction does take place on social media. So we believe it's appropriate for the code to at least address social media in some form as a method of communication. Generally speaking, the provisions establish that a member's behavior on social media should be held to the same ethical standard as if they were speaking or acting in person. So the behavior that you see on social media should be of an acceptable level that you would see if you were behaving in person or speaking at an event or by another form of communication. It also defines content that should not be posted or shared, for example, offensive or discriminatory content, false or misleading statements, or disclosing confidential information. The complaints and inquiries procedures were also completely rewritten with insight and assistance from the Integrity Commissioner. The process itself generally remains the same, but is more detailed and contains some significant changes, including increasing the time to file a code of conduct complaint after becoming aware of a contravention from the current 6 weeks up to 6 months, allowing the integrity commissioner to abridge or extend timelines if needed in order to accommodate a complainant or a council member, or if in the integrity commissioner's opinion, it would be in the public interest to extend that timeline. And introducing a formal complaint form to make the complaint process more accessible and easier to navigate for the public. And if you've looked at the complaints procedure, there are actually 2 complaint forms, one for code of conduct complaints and the other for conflict of interest complaints. And lastly, just a note on the local boards code of conduct. The Municipal Act also requires municipalities to have a code of conduct for all of their local board members. The local board code of conduct has also been updated to follow the same general content and structure as the new council code. So they're both current documents. The local board code does differ slightly from council's code in order to reflect the unique role and mandate that our resident appointees and volunteers on our local boards serve. So the language is a bit different in certain ways to kind of reflect their roles and responsibilities versus those of council members. And once approved, the local boards code will be distributed to all of our volunteers and appointees on the town's local boards for their information. So as for next steps, tonight we are seeking approval of the documents that are before you, subject to any amendments or changes that you may wish to make tonight. And following that, the documents will appear with a ratifying bylaw for council's approval at its meeting on September 21st. And with that, we're happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Any questions from council? Mayor Collier?
Actually, Madam Chair, I'm going to let somebody else go first. My internet keeps cycling me in and out every minute or so, so I'm going to step away for about 5 minutes, reboot everything, and I'll ask my questions when I come back.
Councillor Bauer, did you have your hand up?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did. Thanks for this, Alec. I really appreciate it. I have a few questions. First, I'm really glad to see the improvements that have been made to make it easier for residents to use this resource, specifically if they want to have contact with the Integrity Commissioner. I think extending the timeline to 6 months instead of 6 weeks is a great idea. It gives people time to be organized, to find out what they're supposed to do, get the help they need to do it, and then actually do it. So I think that does take time. And I also think anytime there's a template or form that people can draw on for this type of situation doesn't happen a lot. I guess people would not have that much experience with it. So whenever there's a form that you can use, I think that makes it a lot easier and makes it less nerve-wracking. So I did have a few questions. The formal complaint form, so on page 100, I believe it is, of the report, it's the second complaint form regarding conflict of interest. I saw that a requirement of submitting this form is that it be notarized or that Commissioner Votes approve that. So I just want to confirm what is that needed for, and is it at no charge to the applicant?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This is one of the interesting mandatory requirements in the Municipal Act for the submission of complaints specifically related to Conflict of Interest Act contraventions to the Integrity Commissioner. You won't see a similar requirement in the complaint form for conduct complaints because it's not a legislative requirement there. To your question about any fees, the town does charge a standard fee for Commissioner of Oath services. Given that we wouldn't receive too many of these, I think in this case, were we to receive one, we would consider waiving the fee in this particular case. That said, it doesn't have to be done at the town. Any member of the public submitting this complaint could have this document notarized or seek out a Commissioner of Oaths anywhere else that service is provided. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from the town.
Okay, but if it did come from the town, we would waive that fee.
Yes, I would be comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you very much. And also just clarify for me, page 51, point 8.3, when you talked about decisions and resolutions are ordinarily communicated to the community by council as a whole, with the assistance of town administration or by the mayor, etc. So does that mean we have to wait for those types of announcements before an individual member of council could make an announcement?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it would depend on the circumstances. So if, for example, council members were aware that, a major announcement were going to be made either by the mayor or by the administration of the town in the near future, it might be an issue perhaps for the code if a member took advantage of that and shared that information before the date at which that information was set to become public. That's essentially what this is getting at. It's more about if there's recognized or acknowledged communication that's going to happen from the town or from the mayor, it would be a code of conduct issue if a member deliberately stepped outside of the bounds of that in order to take advantage of that situation, for example. So it's a more general statement. Members are supposed to acknowledge and respect that this is the general flow of how information is communicated to the public. It wouldn't prevent members, after the fact from sharing that information themselves or posting it on social media or retweeting it in those cases. It's really to deal with situations where, there's an announcement of a formal nature that's being made, and members shouldn't be going out of their way to subvert that in some way.
Got it. Okay. So basically, we would be asked, probably before a top secret announcement, we would just be respectfully asked to hold off, keep it confidential until it's announced through the proper channels. Okay, thank you for answering that. And then I also had a question about penalties and remedial action. Page 59, I believe it was on. So I'm glad to see that there's the opportunity for the Integrity Commissioner to that we can delegate authority to lay out actions. And there were several items for what could be a consequence. So what happened? So I guess my question would be is, let's say something happens, a member is found to be guilty, so to speak, and then they're given sanctions, so they have to write a letter of apology or make a statement, etc. What happens if the member says, "No, I'm not doing it. I don't. You're wrong. I didn't do anything. I'm not taking this action." Is there any repercussion?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, there could be repercussions for that. I think this has happened in other municipalities, and typically what happens in those cases is the failure to comply with any of those remedial actions that have been ordered would itself constitute a subsequent code of conduct contravention, which may then bring its own penalties. John may wish to speak to that because I suspect he's been involved in situations of that nature and can probably speak from experience.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Bowers, and thank you, Alex. Actually, Councillor Bowers, I have that very same situation this evening at another municipality where the council member was incredibly profane in his social media responses to a resident. And the penalty that's been recommended is a reprimand. But we've also recommended that the member, as a remedial measure, apologize to the complainant, and the member has vowed to not apologize. He said to us he's not going to do so. The way we wrote the report is we remained seized of the matter and remained able to report back to council should the member not apologize within a set period of time, or provide a full apology. That's happened as well, where the member really doesn't apologize at all and provides some other some words to the effect that, if I offended anyone, and I don't know how they possibly could have been offended, but I apologize for the misunderstanding. So we usually reserve onto ourselves the authority to report back to council and to recommend an escalated penalty, essentially.
Okay. Okay, and is there an end point where if you just keep getting resistance from this member, no, not doing that, you escalate it, no, not doing that. What's the bottom line? What's the end line there?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Bauer. Yeah, and that happens as well because there could be an escalated penalty. So for instance, we could come back and say the member certainly hasn't apologized, has refused to, or did not apologize in a way that was sincere, contrite, acknowledged that they'd made a mistake, and therefore we might recommend a penalty of, say, X days suspension of pay. That would be levied on the member. The member refuses still to apologize. I think at some point you might say, okay, well, we might impose the most significant penalty, 90-day suspension of pay, and that's the pretty much end of the story. If the member just can't apologize or refuses to apologize, there's nothing that you can get them to do so except perhaps exerting the maximum penalty, which is, monetary, and that's, you're limited by legislation there.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate the response.
Anything further, Councillor Bauer?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harris, thank you for all this work you guys have done, the due diligence of doing the comparison between several municipalities. And it was good for me to read through this again. Just a very, very small question. We take a lot of pride in promoting our businesses or small businesses when they open. Other than for the grand openings, we go in there and especially restaurants, we eat their food and we give them a shout out. But somewhere along the line, I read that we should not be endorsing businesses. I just want to know how that steps on each other at all, if that can be explained to me, if that makes any sense, what I asked.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Khan, yes, it does. And that particular issue is actually addressed in Section 7 of the draft code for business relations. Section 7.5 specifies that nothing within the code would prohibit a member from attending or promoting the opening of a new business as a function within the community as part of their official duties. We recognize that that's a role that council members regularly play when new businesses open up in the town, which is completely separate from a member of council, say, using their position to endorse or support a business for its own gain and perhaps for the gain of the members. So those are two very different things. The latter would not be permitted, but of course the code makes exceptions for when businesses open and allows council members to participate in those opening ceremonies because it's part of your official duties to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Afterwards, and we go back again with our families and we give them a shout out. Would that be an endorsement? Would that be considered an endorsement? There's no personal gain for us or our families. We just want to help, give the shout out to the local businesses. So I want to make sure that that's not considered an endorsement, or if it is an endorsement, I don't know.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think you would want to consider, and John might be able to provide a bit of guidance from some examples as well, but I think you would want to consider what the limit of that communication is and think about if you're providing that for certain businesses in your community, are you able to provide that for all of the businesses in your community, right? There's a matter of fairness to some extent if you're promoting some over others. I think it really comes down to what the nature of that communication is. I can't necessarily say definitively one way or another, but I think it really does come down to how it's communicated.
Madam Chair, it's John Mascare, and if I could add to that, to Councillor Collin, it really is a fact-driven determination. A shout out sounds very innocent. A weekly shout out to the same coffee shop, restaurant, or other business to the exclusion of others would look more like an improper use of influence. What the evil that's being guarded against here is, as members of council, you always have to remember that you have a lot of influence. People will probably come and ask you for a reference or a referral over other people because your title, your elected office gives you a certain standing, and you have to be careful that you don't use it to the detriment of others. So while a shout out sounds very innocent, as I said, depending on its frequency, the manner in which it's done, and the fact that it may be to the exclusion of others, could create some imbalance and inequity there. So you always have to guard against that. I've often said to people, if to members, if you'd like to do that and you really do have a concern about it, and it's not just a quick, hey, had coffee, on your Twitter handle, I had coffee this week, and great service at whatever. I think you need to be careful, and we often will look at that and give you some advice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mascara. Much appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Mayor Collier, are you ready for your question before I go to Councillor Tyler Moran? You're on mute.
Go. Good. I hope we're better this time. I've rebooted everything, so my apologies. And I missed Mr. Mascaren's presentation, but I did hear the very end something about, could you repeat the last sentence, please, regarding posting a review of going to a restaurant or something? And
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to Mayor Collier. Mr. Harris had earlier commented that if you read the section under which the provision appears, it's business relations and improper use of influence. And what we were seeking to guard against was the extra level, or the escalated level of influence that members of council have when people ask them to support them, to endorse them, to refer them, recommend them. You have to always be careful of that. So all I was saying is a shout out sounds like an innocent thing, but the frequency of it, the fact that it's done to the exclusion of perhaps others, and the way it's made, all have a bearing and could constitute possibly an improper use of influence. So, Mr. Mayor, what I was saying there is, if there's any doubt that it's maybe on the fence on whether it's an endorsement or a promotion, you can always come and ask, and just let us know what it is that you're proposing to do, and we can give you a, I think you're okay with that. Have you done it before? Are you related to any of these people? Those sorts of questions, just to give you some advice on it.
okay, I'm sorry, I cut out in the middle, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. When we decided to do the review of the code of conduct, I never envisioned us getting this deep into, not being able to say, had great sushi today, without potentially putting ourselves in a situation for a code of conduct complaint. If we've gone that far, I have major concerns, because that's part of promoting business, and that's part of, and I'm not even getting to my questions and my concerns yet. That's just based on the presentation. That is going, I think, way far away from the intent of our code of conduct. Can you speak to
Madam
that?
Chair, if I can answer that, if
Please.
it's as simple as that, Mr. Mayor, you attend a sushi restaurant and you tweet out that you had a great service, great plate of sushi, and recommend it to anyone. That's great. One time only, terrific. If you were to do that every week, I think you would agree with me that would be quite different.
Well, I may have great sushi every week at the same place. I don't know. I like what I like. I don't
Okay.
generally
And I would
go to that many
submit that
places.
tweeting about it every week would be to the exclusion of other restaurants and might be seen as improper use of influence.
Okay, fair enough. Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, I have a lot of questions, but they were based on the original clerk's presentation. Is it okay for me to ask both
Yes.
at this point? Okay, thank you. I do have quite a few, and I did warn the clerk during the mayor's meeting today, because this is something that is incredibly important. I do really pride myself in the fact that Ajax was one of the very first municipalities to actually develop a council code of conduct. In fact, this was one of the pillars of my platform in 2003 when I first ran, and I believe we brought forward the first code of conduct in 2004. So transparency and accountability is very, very important, and I am glad to see a lot of the recommendations in here. But given that and given how important this is,
You're breaking up.
I lost him totally.
Yeah, you're frozen, Sean.
Okay, in the meantime, Councillor Tyler Moran, would you like to ask your question?
Sure.
Questions?
No, I'll be brief. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question for Mr. Harris in regards to page 13.
You keep breaking out, Mayor Collier. So I'm just going to go to Rob Tyler Moran for his questions so you can fix your problem, hopefully. So go ahead, Councillor Tyler Moran.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just quickly on page 13, Mr. Harris, maybe Mr. Mascarin, it says the conclusion, the proposed revisions to the codes and the complaints and inquiries procedures will bring council's code into line with modern standards seen across the region of Durham and the rest of the GTA. Is this papers very similar to Whitby, York region, Toronto? Are we sort of in line as it says here? Is it very similar? I'm just interested to hear how we compare to the other municipalities. Just a slight deeper answer if we could get.
Mr. Harris?
So through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Tyler Moran, I would say overall yes.
Okay.
There's a couple interesting things that have happened since the Integrity Commissioner framework and the Code of Conduct framework became mandatory in 2019. One of the requirements of the new legislation was that all codes contain certain baseline sections, which I believe are in the report. That has caused quite a bit of standardization to occur within the municipal sector amongst codes. So they all have started to kind of converge towards saying the same type of things and having the same types of requirements. One of the things that stood out for us in doing this review, the last time the code was reviewed was in 2015, before much of this framework had come into place. And because of that, we were seeing that our code was actually a bit unlike a lot of other codes because we hadn't gone through this exercise to bring us kind of in line with what you see. So a lot of so for example, the language around gifts and benefits, standardizing that with the region, along with other municipalities in Durham, it is quite consistent in a lot of those areas. But there are also areas that we've expanded that, say, other municipalities don't have as much of. So, for example, the communications media relations section is much more robust in the code that we're proposing tonight than you might find in some other municipalities in the GTA. But then in those cases, those codes might have other sections that are unique to them and their situations that don't necessarily apply in Ajax. So the broad strokes are quite consistent, but there's still a lot of room to make sure that this is a set of rules that works for this council.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Anything further, Councillor Tyler Moran? No? Okay, Mayor Collier, are you able to connect with us? You're on mute.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm trying to call in right now because this is not getting any better. I'll try again and I'll phone in. Let me get to my questions. Am I still on?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just let me go through here, and I do apologize if I'm repeating some of the questions that were asked. So I'll just try and cut to the main one here. I just wonder, one, what does the Municipal Act say with regarding delegated authority? It speaks to it a little bit as far as the if you are found to have contravened code, what does the Municipal Act say?
Okay, you're frozen again. I think you might want to call in.
I did get the gist of the question, but I'm hesitant to answer it if he's not able to hear the
I
answer.
know, I know. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask? Okay. Regional Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just regarding the social media policy and
Ready for
whether
this. To the
there's a difference between quote unquote official accounts versus personal accounts.
We're having difficulty hearing you.
Me as well?
Yes,
Oh, I apologize.
no problem.
It's a problem across the board. My question was regarding social media and whether there's a difference between personal accounts and official accounts when it comes to the policy, because we're now viewing social media as we are as if we're actually saying it ourselves, which is fine. But I want to make sure that if I tweet something or retweet something just from my personal account, whether that reflects me as a politician.
Mr. Harris?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This is an interesting question, and I think it's one that members of council across Ontario struggle with a bit now, because quite a few come from, they get into politics, they have a personal social media account, and then they have an official one. And where exactly does the line get drawn between your personal capacity as an individual member of the public and your official capacity as a member of an elected body? So the code very briefly speaks to this and simply says that there's nothing in the code that prevents a member from having, say, an official social media account or set of accounts and their own personal accounts. But what I think we would caution, and I think John can echo this a bit, is that if you are going to maintain, if any member is going to maintain a number of social media accounts and consider some personal and some professional, that you do your utmost to divide the content between those as cleanly as you can. There will always be an interpretation that as an elected official, everything you do is viewed through the lens of being an elected official, and that may apply to any social media account that you operate. But the more that you can do to separate those two roles and keep official communications about town business to your professional accounts and keep personal posts to a personal account, the better off any member will be in terms of what the expectations are for behavior on each of those accounts.
And presumably, for example, if the town of Ajax had our COVID videos, or we all joined in a Facebook call, most of us, if I'm not all of us, logged in through our personal accounts, not our pages. That would be something that you would probably advise against and suggest we log in through our pages, correct?
Generally, yes. If you're going to be conducting official town business in some capacity or acting in your role as an elected member, then you should be operating through official professional social media accounts.
Okay, it's good to know because I think it's a very much a blurred line in terms of content, and I don't think any of us have posted anything offensive or even remotely offensive, but I think it just bears repeating that we should be doing our best to separate our personal and professional lives as much as we can on the social media side, especially with this policy coming into play. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. That's my only question.
Thank you. Regional Councillor Crawford? Your mic's on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think a little bit further on what Sterling, Regional Councillor Lee was saying was, just so I understand it, and I think this, I don't mean to sound so obvious, but I cannot be obnoxious or discriminatory or anything on my personal page and excuse that behavior because it's my personal page. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think you might find that the Integrity Commissioner could receive a code of conduct complaint for such content on a personal account. And perhaps, John, I don't know if you've dealt with a similar type of scenario before or have any experience with that.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Harris. In fact, this is one of the, apart from complaints by staff against their treatment by members of council, and maybe the leaking of confidential information, social media posts by members of council through a private media handle is probably the biggest complaint that I often get. I often say, look at what the guide to elected official says from municipal affairs. It says you have three hats, and one of them is a representative capacity. You're at all times a representative of your municipality. And I think it's just too convenient to say, well, I'm doing this in my private capacity because, someone may find it offensive, but I put my council hat on another time. I think that line is very, very tenuous, and you have to be very, very careful. The first thing that we look at when we see someone complaining about a private social media post is we have a look at the background to the social media handle, and you often see that the member is freely discussing things that are happening at the municipality, even though it's a private handle. So I don't see a lot of difference between the two. And I often say, if you come out of a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and you get into a fist fight, what's the newspaper heading going to say when it comes out, on Tuesday? It's going to say Councillor X in brouhaha at bar. It won't say Ms. Crawford, Mr. Lee, Ms. Bauer. It'll say council member, because that's how you're defined. So I have to say, I probably take a pretty hard line there, and I don't think I generally am swayed too much by it being a private account. I think anything you say possibly can be seen as contravening the code of conduct if it's profane, if it's discriminatory, if it's harassment, or if it's hate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've always thought that as a counselor, like you said, you're on all the time. Grocery store, getting gas, doesn't matter what you're doing. You still are representing the town regardless of whether I'm sitting here in front of you as a counselor. I 100% agree. Thank you.
Regional Councillor Lee.
Sorry, just a follow-up to that
Sure.
line of questioning. Thank you. So it goes beyond that, though, because I'm reading our policy 8.6.1 says, be false or with the intent to mislead other members, staff, members of council, or the public. So as an example, if on my personal Facebook page, I was sharing QAnon conspiracy theories, that would, and someone complained about it, I could be slapped with a $90 or a 90-day suspension in theory because of that, correct?
In theory, yes. If a complaint were filed and any integrity commissioner were to investigate that and determine that constituted a contravention of the code of conduct, then yes.
I agree with that, Councillor Lee.
Okay, and just what if it? I'm sorry to bring up hypotheticals, but this is very much a new policy that it bears kind of going over. What if it's incredibly partisan posts? Not from someone. Do you get? I guess is it up to the integrity commissioner to determine whether the post itself was maliciously sent, or what if I truly believed in XYZ source that may be discredited? Do you, where is that line, especially on a personal Facebook page? I just want to clarify as best you can.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. It's, again, very fact specific. It's hard. There's no bright line. If you read any of the cases under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, almost case after case, when they're deciding it, say, hey, there's no bright line to this. And that's what I say about these things. You have to look at it. It's very difficult. And quite honestly, we have a couple of those right now. I have a mayor who's saying to me, hey, I've belonged to this group for years. Everyone knows it's a partisan political organization. And yeah, you may not like it. It may not be politically correct right now. And who are you to judge? And my response is, you appointed me. The municipality appointed me. I'm neutral here. I'm an impartial person who has to look at it the same way a judge or a tribunal member would look at it. So, what is a judge, for instance? What are their qualifications? One of the things that they have to look at are changing values and attitudes in the public eye. So this particular mayor, well, actually, I shouldn't say more because we haven't reported it, but clearly made a statement that isn't in keeping with the current racial social injustice view of things, and he was presenting, in his view, another point of view. I'm not sure that I agree with him. I haven't completed my investigation, but it kind of goes to your point, Councillor Lee, that you're saying, well, what if it's partisan? What if it's on my social media? Well, I think part of the thing that you give up when you're a member of council is you have to remember you have to act with respect and decorum towards everyone, and you have to have a view to all of your constituents, not just maybe to a certain segment. Again, I can't say it any more than that, other than we do look at it, and I do approach it impartially, and I try not to find contravention when there's none there. And I appreciate that there's lots of sensitivity out there these days on both sides. Actually, all sides, I should say. And it's not an easy question.
You're muted, Sterling.
I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, has Mayor Collier been able to get through by telephone?
Yes, he appears to be connected by telephone now.
Yeah, I'm on the line.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm actually, Councillor Lee was asking some of my questions there, and I'm actually even more concerned now at this point. It sounds like all of us had better just shut down our personal social media accounts. And I'll give you an example. I mean, when Councillor Lee spoke about partisan, I mean, people know I'm not a big supporter of the current federal government and the scandals. And I find it incredibly ironic that we are getting such a big magnifying glass on a council that has never had a validated complaint put in against them, when we have a prime minister that is on his third investigation so far and has two. So if I see one of those cartoons and share it, which I do, and somebody finds that offensive, if I understand correctly what was said, I can be found in violation of a code of conduct, even though it's on my personal page. Is that accurate? Even if the information that I share is true. If somebody gets offended by it.
To simple answer your question, yes, Mr. Mayor, we would have to take a look at it and consider it, whether it may be the political view of a number of people. That doesn't necessarily make it correct. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're entitled to propagate that view.
But what about, as a voter and a taxpayer in this country, my rights to have an opinion on upper levels of government, or anybody's rights for that matter?
You're certainly entitled to have.
This is basically muzzling all members of council from any personal opinions on pretty much anything based on the writing of this right now. Because somebody is very interpretive, and somebody could interpret this, anything you put out there, to be offensive. And even though I only, on my settings on Facebook, for instance, only allow friends to see my comments, still, there's nothing, like we are basically liable for pretty much everything we put down. Is that fair interpretation?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mayor Collier, you could be potentially liable for anything that is on your social media that then is shared and disseminated by others. Yes.
Okay. I have as I said to the clerk earlier during the mayor's meeting, probably a good 20, 25 minutes of questions that I'm not going to ask, because I really think that this is going to need to go back. I will, at the appropriate time, be moving to refer this back to staff, because I don't think this is doing what this council wanted it to do. I'm thinking that we're lining ourselves up. Like last year alone, the integrity commissioner, and no, all due respect, but the bill for the integrity commissioner last year was, I think, $24,000, and $16,000 of that was to do with 3 complaints that were made against, I assume, me. I know for fact one was made against me, because the person that made it posted about it on social media, and that cost Ajax taxpayers in excess of $9,000. And if we are bringing forward this code of conduct that is going to be so tight, I see this opening up. You know, I think there's no secret to the number of I'll say fans that I have that are absolutely just looking for every little thing. I see this being a very, very expensive proposition for the Ajax taxpayer, because people are going to be sending complaints about every little thing. So I won't bother with my questions, because I'm going to be moving to refer this once we're done. Thank you.
Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question that came up because of something that Mr. Mascarin said. You mentioned the 3, I guess, most common complaints that are filed. The first one being staff commenting about council's treatment of them. And I think the third one you said was the social media, the conflict between what's private and professional. But I missed what you said the other one was, the second item. And I'm just curious.
Yeah. Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Bauer, the second one was leak of confidential information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from council or comments on the code of conduct? So I just had a couple of comments, not real questions, in respect to some of Mayor Collier's concerns. I don't think Ajax, and if I'm mistaken, Mr. Mascarin, you can correct me, but I don't think we're special in any way that we get this attention from our constituents. I think more and more the changing in values and attitudes, as you put it, with respect to accountability and transparency has changed. And I think we need that third party who is not, affiliated with council directly to make some calls on some of these concerns, to address them at a nonpartisan level when it's brought forward by a resident. So really, I guess it is a question in a sense, are we any different than any other municipality?
Madam Chair, I don't think you really are. I think the same issues are pretty common in most municipalities. There may be varying degrees, but they're all pretty common. So I don't know. I see it very differently from what Mayor Collier has indicated. I don't see it quite as this dire situation where we're seeking to muzzle everything that council does outside of the arena of town hall or anywhere. I think I'm saying just be respectful and be courteous and be just look at everyone as an equal. And I appreciate that many people might not see it the same way that everyone else sees it. I think that's why you have someone like me who, has a look at it, is impartial, is neutral. I've dealt with a number of these, and I don't know how I can say it other than sometimes it's pretty apparent when someone is trying to take a shot when there's really nothing there. I appreciate Mayor Collier's comments about the cost from last year. I can tell you that, and I think I'd spoken to your clerk earlier. She said to me, in general, you look after about 40 municipalities. Where were we in dollar costs? And I said, you were probably in the top 5. I said, but you were probably somewhere around the bottom of those top 5. Some municipalities don't have anything, and some, were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've been advising 2 municipalities recently, not as their integrity commissioners, their legal counsel, but they've had integrity commissioner costs upwards of $300,000. And that's, I think, because they don't have very good codes of conduct. And I'll be quite honest, I don't think they had very good integrity commissioners looking after it. So that's where I think you get some of those problems. I appreciate it's a cost that you don't want to see. But it's a cost that the province has put upon all municipalities. They said you have to keep your own house in order. Remember, municipalities for many years had argued no more provincial oversight. Let us be the judges of our own keeping. And so the province said, okay, you have to have a code of conduct, and we're going to tell you that you have to have 4 subject matters, but we're not going to tell you how to govern that. So the province has given you a lot of leeway to keep your own house in order, but they're saying it's at your cost.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that information. And you're quite right. It's the cost of doing business as a municipality, and it's something that we have to do. And I think it's really important that also we allow our constituents to have, a track for accountability, somewhere they can go if they have a concern and a complaint, no matter what. And yes, we know that some are more vexatious than others. However, that's part of doing business as well. So, I have to thank staff for the work they put into looking at the code of conduct. I know they've worked very hard on it, and I think they've done a really good job. And thank you for being here this evening with us, Mr. Maskern. So are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Lee, Regional Councillor Lee.
Before there's a motion to defer and we can't talk about it, I need to clarify something with the clerk. Now, hypothetically, if there was nothing in our code of conduct regarding social media, so let's say it's removed from this report, does that mean we can't be reported on it to the integrity commissioner? Or is what we're saying is, regardless of this is in our formal code of conduct or not, if someone were to complain about it, then they would complain about it?
So through you, Madam Chair, to Regional Councillor Lee, this is an excellent question. I think what this section is trying to accomplish is to provide some more specific guidelines around social media in particular. But in the absence of it, I would reasonably argue that the general obligations and sections with regard to respectful conduct towards members of staff, each other, and the public would all continue to apply regardless of the communication medium. Your point is well taken. If a message on social media is considered, offensive or derogatory in some way, it's functionally not very different than that same communication in another format. And if somebody were to make a complaint with respect to that under different provisions of the code, I would expect that an integrity commissioner would examine that as well. So it's not a matter of muzzling members on social media, but it's also really a recognition that any communication that a member of council puts out is going to be subject to public scrutiny, and that comes with a certain obligation.
So I guess my concern is we to the mayor's point, we could refer this back to staff, but what I'm hearing, and I guess the clerk can correct me, is that even if we were to change this and hypothetically not have a social media section at all, we would still be bound to the to complaints to the IC regarding social media. Am I correct in that statement?
I believe you are correct in that statement, and I'm not sure if John's familiar with any codes that don't deal with social media but have received complaints in relation to social media. That might be a good example. But when we structured the content in the sections on social media, we took some care to try to get them to mirror the general obligations that you see for other forms of communication, because we think that those standards should be relatively consistent. So
Right.
your point is well taken. It's the same standard. It's just applied in a specific case.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, if I could answer, and thank you, Mr. Harris, on that. Councillor Lee, I didn't, I should have said, I think it's in the report, I had provided a draft version of what I normally use as a code of conduct. And what I've been doing is I've been developing it over a number of years. And, I go to a municipality and I, propose a code of conduct. Of course, I don't work at it from the bottom up. I don't start to form it. And I have one that's already there. And so I said to Mr. Harris, well, I have one that I consider my best practice, and it didn't have a social media provision in it. But yet I have had complaints about statements or postings, even though there is no social media clause itself in the code of conduct. And I've handled them, as Mr. Harris has said, through other provisions. For instance, disrespectful conduct, refrain from making disparaging comments, unfounded statements, things like that. So which are found in the general obligations.
Okay, that is incredibly helpful, and will help frame, I guess, whatever happens after this conversation. So, Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you for your responses.
Thank you. Anything further?
Madam Chair, Sean here again.
Yes,
I will ask a couple of questions, if I may, please, based
certainly.
on this information. I'll move on to the report, page 12, regarding the increase of time to file a code of conduct complaint from 6 weeks to 6 months. And I would just the reasoning for this. I understand that the last code of conduct complaint against me in November was turned down, my understanding, because it was outside the 6-week period. But if somebody finds out about something that they feel is of significance enough to warrant a code of conduct complaint, why would anyone wait longer than 6 weeks? Why would we open this up to 6 months so somebody can sit on that for an extended period of time? If it is that offensive to somebody, why wouldn't they act on it within a 6-week time frame of being notified? It's not within 6 weeks of it happening, it's within 6 weeks of being notified. Surely the simple form that's included as an attachment I could fill out in less than 5 minutes. Why would we need to go from 6 weeks to 6 months?
Madam Chair, if I could answer that.
Yes.
Two main reasons. The first one is it's generally accepted that a 6-month period is what I'm familiar with. It's in pretty much all of my codes. Sorry, when I say my codes, not necessarily mine, but the municipalities that I look after.
Mr. Master, in just 1 second, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act is 6 weeks. So the provincial legislation and the provincial timeline is 6 weeks. Why do you require 6 months?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I can answer that to Councillor to Mayor Collier. The reason being is the consequences for a penalty under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act can extend to removal from office as well as disqualification for up to 7 years. Huge penalties. So there's a short fuse limitation, and it's from the date that a person ought to have been aware of the matter occurring, whereas 6 months for relatively minor penalties, a suspension of pay, a reprimand. The other ones are all remedial actions. They're not penalties. So quite different there. So I think there has to be a bit of leeway and not a short 6-week period, which I just think is just much too short. The second reason, though, is it's not that simple. I think the example that you gave, or that I think you were bringing forward, Mayor Collier, and I don't mean to argue with you on this, but yeah, if you perhaps were accused of having said something to someone at a public function easy enough. You file that, but sometimes it's not that simple. And the way we've created the code is there has to be some reasonable and probable grounds for the complainant to come forward. Sometimes they might have to file an FOI request to get that information. They cannot get that answer within 30 days, within 60 days. They may need to have extra time to be able to bring forward. And the standard that I look at is 6 months. I don't think it should be any longer. I've seen some codes that have no time period, and I don't think that's fair. I think it should be dealt with within the term of council, and I think six months is a reasonable amount of time.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, because quite honestly, if somebody offended me to a point where I felt I had to take action, I would probably not need more than 6 days, let alone 6 weeks. I think 6 months is actually quite excessive. But we'll have to agree to disagree on that. And as far as the other regarding the social media, if we're still subject to that, then why bother having it in here?
Through you, Madam
Like
Chair.
if anything we say on any platform or any venue is applicable to this, then why do we have to specifically even have that in here?
Mr. Harris?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. There were a few reasons why we included it. And sorry, John, I do have to correct you. The template you sent us did have a section on social media. It was in there. In addition to that, we did get a lot of the feedback through the survey that we did on IMO that said social media was a topic of interest and should be covered in the code. And there are some specific sections in there that go beyond the general obligations that speak to how social media operates. For example, sharing content that belongs to a third party, making sure that it's publicly available content before doing so, those kinds of things. So we were seeing it from a confluence of perspectives. It is something that's showing up in more and more codes within Ontario. It was something that came out of the public feedback survey and was reflected in the template document that we received. And it made sense to include it. I certainly take your point that the content that you post as members on social media could very easily still be subject to this code, but it provides much needed clarity to people who are reading this code and interpreting it and possibly applying it to be able to point to a specific section on social media and say, this is the provision that I think has been contravened. And it's a little bit more specific than just the general obligations.
Okay. I believe and I'm not certain, but I think one of the complaints filed was to do with me blocking someone from my personal page. Can you speak, Ms. Mascarin? I'm sorry, is it Mascarin?
Yes.
I pronounce it Mascarin.
Mascarin, okay, sorry. I wanted to make sure I was pronouncing it right. Can you speak to that, please? Because again, I have blocked a number of very toxic people from my personal page. Will that open me up to a code of conduct violation?
I'm on. Yes, Madam Chair, through you. No, if it was your own personal page, I wouldn't see an issue there. I know that there's been questions. I think Donald Trump was ordered to unblock people from his official page, and I think Jim Watson, the mayor of Ottawa, also had a lawsuit coming forward on his official page. I think that's quite different from your personal page, your private page handles or emails. So I think that's quite different. I wouldn't have an issue on that. So that's how I would treat it.
Fair enough. I'd like to go to the Code of Conduct, item 14.3. The Integrity Commissioner shall provide an annual report to Council. But sorry, 14.4, the Integrity Commissioner may also provide periodic reports. Now, one of the things I've spoken to the clerk about is if a complaint is made against any member of council, I think that member of council has a right to know a complaint was made about them and what the complaint is. I read somewhere in here, and I can't find it in front of me right now, but this is a lot of pages, where you will provide a copy of the complaint at some point. Why is there an issue providing a copy of the complaint regardless to the member that the complaint is about?
Yes, Madam Chair, through Mayor Collier, great question. It's something that I have been asked many times, and I'll tell you what my position on this is. And I believe when I first came in front of you, I think when I was introduced back a year and a half ago, I think I said to you, you'd probably be surprised at the number of complaints that come in that I don't actually even go to a formal investigation on. And I think at the time I said anywhere from 40 to 60%. I think that number is held true. If in fact, I think it's really somewhere 50 to 60% of all complaints that come in, I end up, or we end up, my firm ends up summarily dismissing and not dealing with it. That means that it comes in and there's something that's not correct about it. There's something that just doesn't give it any kind of air of reality, that anything has really gone wrong. And I say just because I have the authority to investigate doesn't mean that I do have to investigate. And so what Mr. Harris and I have attempted to do in here is impose a standard on any complainant that comes forward where they have an onus to meet and they have to actually prove that there are reasonable and probable grounds for finding a complaint. And I am getting to the point. So I thought, okay, I often dismiss complaints on a summary basis, and I think there's inherent authority to do so. We've built in something into the protocol itself because I've had people complain to the Ontario Ombudsman that I've summarily dismissed, and where's the authority? The authority comes out through the Legislation Act, but neither here nor there. And the reason I thought, why bother the member if I'm going to dismiss it and there's really no substance, there's going to be no it's not going to be sustained in any way. Why do I even need to bother the member and let them know about it? Because immediately you get one of these and there's this emotional turmoil that goes on. Oh, who's complaining? Because it's your ethical conduct. All of a sudden, you get then you start asking questions. It leads to much greater cost, much greater time for me to have to deal with it, and a lot of emotional investment on the part of members. So initially, I said, no, the complaint will not be made known to the member unless I actually have to proceed with it. And therefore, then I have to give notice to the member, and the member becomes aware and has to respond. Now, I fully respect what staff have done, and they've said no. Now members would like to know, and that's fine. It'll lead to additional cost and additional time in order to have to deal with it. But I don't have an issue if that's what council would like to see.
Well, speaking personally, thank you for that. Speaking personally, yeah, I would like to be notified of any and all complaints, whether dismissed or not, that come in against me. I expect complaints. It's not a surprise. I absolutely expect them. I know there's a group just looking and digging, and I expect it. But the fact is it fair to say, regardless, if there's any complaint whatsoever, whether you dismiss it or not, the town will get a bill for that service, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So if the property taxpayers of Ajax are going to be on the hook for, let's say last year, for example, 3 complaints that were dismissed without merit or outside of time frame or whatever the reasoning was, they were dismissed. The simple fact is it still cost Ajax taxpayers $16,000 in change. And if we're talking about transparency, I think we have to be transparent. It's no secret that there's people out there just looking to dig stuff up and put in complaints. It's no secret at all. I think the taxpayers of Ajax have a right to know what that's costing and you know, how many, and I would like to know as well. So if it's up to that, I mean, I don't have any issue with you letting me know. I would rather have it in here because it says you may. I found the spot. It's under the Integrity Commissioner Complaints and Inquiries Procedures on page 80, well, it's not 86, 87 or 88, where it says that you may provide. I would actually prefer that to say that you will provide. Is that a problem?
Madam Chair, if I could make a comment.
Yes, please.
So John alluded to it a little bit earlier, but we did have a good discussion about this in the drafting of the complaints and inquiries procedure. And we within staff were of the opinion that although it would potentially lead to increased costs, I think we are in agreement that it is in the interest of members to be able to see a copy of a complaint that is filed against them, even if that complaint is summarily dismissed. So if you're looking at complaints and inquiries procedure and you look at section 3.1.9, that's exactly what that section says, that when a complaint is filed in the future with the Integrity Commissioner, a copy of that complaint with personal and identifying information redacted would be provided to the member on a confidential basis so that they are aware that the complaint's been filed. John may still proceed with a summary dismissal of that complaint, and it could go nowhere. But at least for members, they could be aware that the complaint's been filed and prepare themselves in case it does go forward. So we felt that that was beneficial to members and have included it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Clerk. Can we go back to 3.1.4 for a second, where we have the term an elector as defined in section 1 of the Conflict of Interest Act? We have a code of conduct here, and if approved tonight, we're all subject to it. Can only Ajax electors file a code of conduct against an Ajax councillor, or can anybody be classed as an elector, being over 18 and eligible to vote?
People can file a code of conduct complaint. The language you're referring to in 3.1.4 is actually legislated in terms of Municipal Conflict of Interest Act complaints. Those must be filed by an elector or a person demonstrably acting in the public interest. So that language is specific to those types of complaints because it's legislated.
So an elector, anybody over the age of 18 eligible to vote in the province of Ontario can file a code of conduct complaint against any one of us if they choose.
Madam Chair, if I can help.
Yes.
That, what Mayor Collier pointed, 3.1.4, refers to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act specifically. That's an application made under that act for relief. It's any person can make a complaint under the code of conduct. It doesn't have to be just an elector, I don't believe. I'm right about that, right, Alex?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So that section you're referring to, Mayor Collier, just refers to the elector, and it's only a person in Ajax can, an elector in Ajax can file a Municipal Conflict of Interest Act application, or, as Alec has pointed out, a person demonstrably acting in the public interest, i.e. a public interest litigant.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Moving down to 3.4.4, the Integrity Commissioner may at its sole and absolute discretion report to council on any matter. That's fine. 3.5.1, where the Integrity Commissioner determines that an inquiry should be conducted, you may provide the member with a copy of the complaint. I would prefer that to say you will provide the member with a copy of the complaint. And I think we've, you know, I'm not sure why it says you will up above, but here it says may. Is there a problem with amending that, Alex?
Hang on, I'm just having a look at the section.
If I can, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Alec, if you don't mind. I think the mayor has a point. I think 3.5.1 is a relic of my earlier draft, and then we amended the version above that says all of the members of council do get a copy of the complaint. So this should align. So the mayor does have a point on 3.5.1.
So we can change may to will. Do you need that in an amendment, or can that be a friendly to this?
I think that could be considered friendly as it's consistent with what's proposed earlier in the procedures. We can change that may to a shall.
Okay. And there was somewhere else, and I don't want to burn up a lot of time on this because I already have burned up a lot of time on my technical issues, which I apologize for. But somewhere in here it says that if there is an inquiry and it is unsubstantiated, and where the complaint is not sustained, the integrity commissioner is not obligated to report to council on the results of the inquiry or any findings, may do so at its discretion. Quite honestly, if there's a inquiry and it's not sustained, meaning it's found to be there wasn't a contravention, I want that information to be public, and I think that information should be public. But that's not what this says. It says the commissioner is not obligated to report to council. I would suggest that report should come to council, regardless whether it's sustained or not.
Madam Chair, if I could address that, I hear your point, Mr. Mayor. The reason why we hadn't drafted it in that way is it just takes, again, additional time, energy, and cost to bring a report to council, often having to have it explained at council. The statute itself really only talks about reports where there's a contravention that's found and a penalty that's imposed. That's the only time it actually requires the report to go. I hear your point and I understand the reasoning for it. You're saying, hold on. You're saying if I'm let off, if I'm absolved, then why wouldn't that come to council? Otherwise, there's this air of, especially if the person has gone to the media. In the past, I've exercised my judgment and I've tried to balance cost effectiveness with the need for me to actually bring forward a public report that may absolve the member of council. Clearly, if the report is going in the member's way and I am looking to dismiss it or not sustain it in any way, the council member always wants me to write a report and attend that council and to speak forcefully about how they were wrong. There's an additional cost to that. And again, the Act only requires a report only if there's a contravention and a possible penalty imposed. I hear your point, and with those comments, if you were to say, I'd at least like to get a copy of the note or the notice to the complainant that dismisses it, happy to oblige. And if council should decide that you'd like all reports to go, even if they don't find a contravention, well, then I'm in council's hands. I won't say no. I'm just alerting you that it'll take additional time, effort, and cost to do so.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll use Councillor Dye's comment. It's cost of doing business. I mean, if we're going to spend money to, like, I'll use the case in November, $9,000 to not investigate something, but that person goes on social media and starts spouting off about how I'm being investigated. Quite honestly, I think it's only fair since we're talking about transparency and accountability, that, you know, people doing fraudulent complaints should also be transparent and accountable. And if, you know, money is going to be spent to investigate a complaint and the complaint is found to be without grounds, I think it's only fair to those of us that have to run and requalify and get voted in every 4 years for our jobs to be able to say, because trust me, social media is a very powerful tool and people use it. and they just say things, and they don't say things that are true often. They just say things, and unless somebody can come out and say differently, it's assumed to be true. And I think that if we're going to be doing this, I think that's also a cost of doing business. If we're going to open this up like this, again, I think the Ajax taxpayers have a right to know whether their money is being well spent or not being well spent. I don't know if I have to do that as a motion. If I want to change that, Mr. Clerk, to is not obligated to is obligated to report to council, or would you rather me bring that as an amendment?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that would be an appropriate amendment, as it does change the nature of that provision. There are other wording changes in that section that might have to happen with that. So if the amendment is more general and just says that section 3.7.6 of the Complaints and Inquiries Procedure is revised to require the Integrity Commissioner to report on the result of essentially any finding, right? Or at least findings where there is no fault, that would be an appropriate amendment. And we would make that change if it's passed and bring that with the final document.
All right, I'll be making that amendment at the proper time. I think everybody would be very relieved. Oh, no, I got one more. Going to the Code of Conduct formal complaint forms. I notice on the Code of Conduct formal complaint form 1, there is not a section of are you an Ajax resident, but on form 2 for the municipal there is. I think I just heard in one of the last questions that only an Ajax resident can file a Code of Conduct complaint. I think that's something that probably should be on that form.
Madam Chair, through you to Mayor Collier, it's the opposite. It's the converse, Mr. Mayor. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act requires you to be an elector, and that means you have to be an elector in the municipality. The same requirement does not exist for the Code of Conduct. Could be any person.
Okay. Well, again, that speaks to my. If we want to be accountable and transparent, I mean, this is, I think, going to cost us a lot of money, and especially since not just Ajax residents can run up the bill if they want to. Any residents can run up the bill. That's the end of my questions. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Sorry, Regional Councillor Crawford, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to have clarification on what was the conversation, because it got a little bit confusing for me. I think I don't really know who I'm directing this to, but it was about, at one point the mayor was upset that the complaints were costing a lot of money, and now we're going to have the Integrity Commissioner come to present every complaint, and that's going to cost us more money?
Correct.
Just clarification, Madam Chair, not every complaint, only those complaints where there's an inquiry.
Okay. Okay.
Most of them are just dismissed without cause, but the ones where there is an investigation, that the report come to council.
Okay. I did want to make a comment about being informed if a complaint was lodged, against, let's say, against me, even though it may not fit the Code of Conduct rules and there's no reason for an investigation. I think it helps to fine tune us as elected officials, because sometimes we can say things that we don't even know are edging up to a line. And I think it's important, it's important to me that I would want to know if something like that were ever lodged. So I 100% agree that we should know if a complaint was ever lodged against us in my opinion. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Just further questions along that same line. So how much extra are we talking about? If an inquiry is found to be sustained or unsustained, but we're getting a report for both, how much extra are we talking about? And also, all of these reports where we are finding out what complaints someone may have about us, those are completely given in anonymity, right? So we cannot, we will not know who has made this complaint. I just want to make sure of that as well.
So, Alec, I don't know if you want to answer the second question. I can answer the first one. So, Councillor Bauer, on your first question, how much more would it be? I would say you probably have to add a third of the cost onto that for the reports to then have to be brought before council. That's my sense. Whatever the cost is, it's about another third onto it. And I don't think that this, sorry, I'll just answer the second part. And if I've gotten it wrong, Alec can correct me. I think we were saying that it won't be now anonymous. The complaints, you will be told who the complainant is when the complaint comes in, and we determine that it actually is a valid complaint, not something that perhaps was incorrectly filed. And I'm sorry, if I could, Madam Chair, just explain this one point. Sometimes complaints do come into me, and we undertake a standard intake analysis when they come. And what we end up finding sometimes is that really, even though it may be a complaint against Councillor Bauer, when we look at the complaint, it's really a complaint about what council did, and you just happen to be the person who moved the motion or voted against it or whatever. So something like that, we would dismiss as not a valid complaint, and we would say there's no basis for us to do anything here. My view, I don't see why you should have a copy of that. Again, if council is determined that they want to see every complaint that comes in, I think, again, that's a bit of a waste of time. So I just wanted to explain the fine point there about anonymity, and now each member finding out about complaints made against them. You wouldn't find out about complaints made against other members because it would be confidential only to the member on which the complaint is filed against.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just add on to John's comments. The section that's in reference here is 3.1.9 of the Complaints and Inquiries Procedure. And I'm afraid John misspoke. We actually did put language in there that would protect the identity of the complainant. So you would receive the substance of the complaint, but any information that might identify them or any information that the Integrity Commissioner feels is necessary to redact to protect their duty of confidentiality, that would be up to the Integrity Commissioner to remove before they send you a copy of the complaint.
Okay, thank you. I think that's important so that we don't, it can get very, very dicey, I think, when we're throwing, when names are being thrown and complaints are being thrown. And okay, and is this something, and emotions, absolutely. Are other municipalities doing this, following this format?
Through you, Madam Chair, we did see some. It's kind of a mix. There are some that will provide copies of the complaints only when they go for an inquiry or investigation. There are some that provide it at the time of filing, and then maybe redact information or perhaps don't. There's not I would say, a lot of consistency within the sector on this. So it really comes down to the local code.
Madam Chair, if I could add, it really does. In my codes, I've always sought to protect the identity of the complainant. I think in most complaint procedures, protocols, the identity of the complainant is not made known to the person. I always reserve the right in my complaint protocols that I would exercise discretion, and if in order for you to make a full defense or a response to a complaint and you need to know who it is, then of course you need to. But in other cases, I don't think it's appropriate. The Ontario Ombudsman takes a very hard line position and says no way that that the complainant should ever be made known. I'm not sure. I'm not stringent about it, but I think at least in my codes, I usually put a provision where the complainant remains anonymous. But as Mr. Harris has pointed out, it is a little bit of a mixed bag when you start looking at other codes. They have various different degrees. Some require full disclosure, some require no disclosure, and some are in between depending on what happens with the complaint.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting.
So I have a question then, Mr. Mascarin. So basically, this is set up, and I agree, to protect the complainant because they have that right to, you know, have an investigation if they feel that something has wronged them in any way. And so we want that transparency, we want that accountability from a third party, but by going back and forth and asking for reports and asking for people's names and what the complaint is about, we're entangled in the whole system once again. So really the objective to have that third party review is no longer objective because we've planted ourselves in the middle of it. Would that be kind of correct? It's not an easy question, I understand. I just see it as very complicated.
Yes, Madam Chair, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm still going to treat the complaint the same way that I would if you know about it, don't know about it. I mean, the whole system is so that you're supposed to have a neutral, impartial third party that looks at it without any biases. If you look at the survey, though, you'll see that some people aren't happy with me and would rather get rid of me altogether. I think that's probably because I didn't seem to go their way, and that's fine. They're entitled to that position. Council can always dismiss me too if they don't like what I'm doing. I think that's probably wrong because then it politicizes what's supposed to be an ethical framework. But you know, that's what it is. And I think I said to you when I first came before your council, if you decide that you don't like me as an integrity commissioner, then you can get rid of me. And I fully will live with that, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to make decisions just because I happen to be getting remuneration from your municipalities that will hold me in good stead so I can be reappointed. I quite honestly have enough municipalities, and there's people integrity commissioners being terminated every day, and calls being made to me as if I want to be another integrity commissioner somewhere else. So there's always that opportunity, and I have to, you know, I have to maintain some integrity here. So I understand what you're saying. I still think I would treat it the exact same way in any event. So I wouldn't worry about that. But I guess I understand your point that the more you start eroding away at the anonymity, the full disclosure, then it becomes much more a larger scale thing where everyone finds out about everything at a larger cost.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not questioning your integrity. I know you do the job that you're given to do. I just think the more we insert ourselves, the more that can go wrong as council, as elected officials. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you so much. Is there anything further?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mayor Collier?
I think maybe we got a little off track with my comments. I just want to clarify. So 3.4.1, page 92, the Integrity Commissioner has discretion whether to carry out an inquiry. Fine. 3.4.4, the Integrity Commissioner may, at its sole and absolute discretion, report to Council on any investigation suspended, summarily dismissed, terminated, not otherwise investigated. And we've said that is different from what we said in 3.5.1, where the Integrity Commissioner determines that an inquiry should be conducted, you shall. But going to what I'm saying, as far as the amendment that I'll be bringing forward, is to deal with if the Integrity Commissioner does go ahead with an investigation. If the investigation is sustained, meaning a member has contravened the code of conduct, a report and presentation will be coming to council. All I'm suggesting is, regardless, if there's an investigation, which we're already going to be paying for, either way it goes, that still comes to council. I'm not talking about all of the other ones that are just summarily dismissed, but if you look at 3.4.4, I think it is. No, that's not the one. I just read it. There's so much here.
I know.
There's so much here trying to find the comment. I read one of the comments that said, upon receipt, oh shoot, where is it? Anyway, I don't want people to get into thinking that what I'm going to bring forward is for everything to come to council. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just strictly the ones where an investigation is done. Because an investigation is done, I think everybody has the right to know which side of the line the ball drops on. I wish I could find this. I just had it here, and I'm struggling to find that section. Oh, 3.4.3, where the Integrity Commissioner summarily dismisses a complaint or terminates an inquiry in accordance with section 3.4.1, the Integrity Commissioner shall provide notice to the complainant and to the member identified in the complaint. So that's already in there to the member. I'm only talking about if there's an inquiry. So it may not be the right section that I quoted, but that's all that I'm looking for as far as the information. Just to clarify. Thank you.
Regional Councillor Lee, you have a question?
What it comes to council, what do we receive for information? Like, I don't understand, what do we override it? Like, I don't understand what the role of council has in this process.
Madam Chair, sorry, was that directed? I
No,
apologize.
it's whoever,
Go ahead.
whoever can answer it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Mr. Mascaray.
I was going to say, that's a very good point, Councillor Lee, because the Act only really makes reference to if an Integrity Commissioner finds a contravention, he or she shall report to council. So, and what's council's role there? It's to make a decision if there's a penalty or a remedial measure that's imposed. You're not cross-examining the investigation, the Integrity Commissioner in the investigation. You're just looking at whether there's a contravention and what penalty or remedial measure. So if there is no penalty and there's no contravention, council doesn't have a role. So in fact, I'm not sure that I would show up. Having said that, Councillor Lee, I have to tell you, I have shown up a couple of times because the matter's been controversial and the complainant has gone to the media, has made a lot of statements. And so I felt that it was appropriate for me to stand in front of council and indicate why the complainant wasn't correct in any of its allegations and to explain what I had to look at. But council didn't have a role other than to hear me and to say, thank you very much for coming out.
I can't hear you, Councillor Lee. No.
Keep going.
Your mic, I can't even see your mic.
I think it's really low.
There you go. I can see, okay, Councillor Bauer, your mic isn't showing up either. No.
Huh.
Now your mic is off, Sterling.
I think he's going to try to reconnect.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
No, kidding. Yes,
Oh.
you can.
Oh. Yikes.
It was so quiet.
I know. So then, to avoid, because a third of the cost of the claim could be thousands of dollars, to just receive a report that says there was an inquiry, was not sustained. Thank you very much. So could it be a request, maybe at the request of the member to receive this? Like, is there a way that that could be optional so that it is not a mandatory cost each time? If the member of the complaint can request to receive this report?
Mr. Harris?
Go ahead, John.
Sorry.
I was going to say, of course, if Madam Chair, if the councillor is in that position, I think, quite honestly, the council would always want to see the report come forward, because it would say the complaint was dismissed or was not sustained for these reasons, and I think the council member would always want that. In general, always wanted to go out into the public. So I think it's not fair to really ask the council member to make that decision on an individual basis. I think it should be yes or no, or to leave it at the discretion of the Integrity Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Regional Councillor Lee, you're back on?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, not great, but I can hear you.
Oh, that's odd. I think Councillor Bauer kind of hit the head of just, the more council involves itself on anything integrity commissioner related, no matter how well intentioned, it defeats the idea of transparency and accountability, which is based on the surveys of what people resoundingly said they wanted. So I understand. I'm not aware of any complaint, but the last one that the town had, we went through our social media channels. We published a very clear statement saying that, there was no current investigation, and that put the matter to bed. I'm okay with that. And then to the integrity commissioner's point, if it goes to the media, if it gets blown up, we're seeing this on CP24, then yeah, he'll probably step in and get the facts straight. But these table stakes, these smaller issues, I don't think should come to the taxpayer of settling to clear our names, which realistically, from a social media point of view, I'm not sure how much it affects the grand scheme of things. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further?
Just one more, please, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mayor Collier.
So 3.4.3, where a complaint is summarily dismissed, the Integrity Commissioner shall provide notice to the complainant and the member identified in the complaint. That's what's in here. So if it comes in, it's unwarranted, it's dismissed, we get to know about it. However, if there's an inquiry and the inquiry proves that the allegations are unfounded, we don't get to know about it. I find it very just wrong that we're worrying about tax dollars at this point, when again last year we spent $16,000 of tax dollars in complaints that if somebody hadn't posted on social media, we wouldn't even have known about. So if there's a complaint and the complaint warrants an investigation, I think we need to know about it. Like 3.4.4 says the member will be notified, but there's nothing saying that the member will be notified in the event of an inquiry and the inquiry is not sustained. It's a bit contradictory. Question mark. Whoever wants to speak to it.
Madam Chair, I can answer that. I think the mayor does have a point. Quite honestly, it's in practical terms, the member would know, because the member would be involved if there's an investigation. The member would know that there's a complaint, sometimes who brought it and what was it about. So what we would normally do, and it may not have found its way into this complaint protocol, and I stand to be corrected, Alec, because you pointed out if I've gotten it wrong. The member would find out, because we would not proceed, and we would end up writing to the complainant saying, we've now concluded and we're not, we haven't sustained your complaint. So the member would find out about that. We may not have put anything to the report. I think the difference is, I think what you were asking, Mr. Mayor, is that you would like that report not just to be between the member and the complainant. If there's been an investigation done, you would like that to come to council, so there's an open and accountable response to it, so everyone knows about it.
Absolutely. Because again, we're politicians. We need to run for re-election every 4 years. Right now, anybody can say anything, and they do, about, I'll just talk to me specifically, all the time on social media, and there's not thing one I can do about it. And it's all false, but they do it. So in this case, as we go through a formal inquiry, and it's unfortunate that it's expensive, but if there's a formal inquiry, I think that has to go the full circle. Whichever way, whichever side of the line the ball drops on, I think that's got to go the full circle. We can't just say okay for one and not for the other for the sake of a couple of bucks. I mean, this is important, and I mean, I don't. Let's look at this in perspective. In 17 years, my 17 years on council with a code of conduct, to my knowledge, there's only ever been one investigation against a past councillor who's not on council anymore in 17 years. And so far in this term of council, there's been at least 3 that did not go to the investigation route. So I think we're talking about something that has a very low probability of actually happening. And this extra 1/3 cost potential is pretty, I don't think that's going to happen maybe once this term, if that. I don't think it's something that's going to be doing. I think most of these complaints are going to be summarily dismissed, but I do think that this has to go full circle. Anyway, I haven't even brought the amendment yet, so we can continue this conversation once I bring the amendment, but I just don't want to get sidetracked. We've got one piece of the code saying that we'll be notified, then the other piece saying that it's not going to go full circle, and I'm just saying that I think it should. So we can finish this when I bring the amendment.
So are you bringing forward this amendment now, Mayor Collier?
I don't believe that it's on the floor yet. I think we have to go through the public thing first.
I have it in front of me, the bylaw for the code of conduct.
Oh, if you would entertain an amendment now.
I haven't read it out. If you want me to read out what I have here from the clerk, I will read it. Then do you want to put forward your amendment?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll ask one more time though first if there's any other questions or comments before I read it. Okay. So being a bylaw to establish codes of conduct for members of council and local boards of the municipality. Whereas the Municipal Act 2001 requires municipalities to establish code of conduct for members of council, and whereas the establishment of a code of conduct for members of council is
Madam
consistent. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. The only motion that would be on the floor for this would be in the report, which simply states that the revised council code of conduct, local boards code of conduct, and complaints and inquiries procedure be approved.
So what page have you got that on, Mr. Harris?
That's on the first page of the covering report. If you like, I can bring it up on the screen.
Yeah, that would be good because I have to run through the pages. So you had the two, no. So you mean your recommendation here?
Yes, that's
that
correct.
the revised council code of conduct, local boards, code of conduct, and complaints and inquiries procedure be approved by council. Okay, so your amendment then, Mayor Collier?
I don't mind moving a report, and then I move an amendment if there isn't a mover already.
Nope. So the revised council code of conduct, local boards, code of conduct, and complaints and inquiries procedure be approved by council. All in favor?
Whoa.
Hold on.
Any
Chair?
comments or questions on that?
Do we have a seconder?
I can't hear Councillor Lee again.
I'll second bringing it
That's
to the
it.
floor. Can you hear me?
Yep. Is there a mover for this?
So
I
Mayor Collier
moved
moved it,
Madam Clerk.
and then I will
Okay.
second bringing it to the floor.
All in favor?
No, we need discussion.
No,
and
I
amendment.
do have an amendment, Madam Clerk.
Thank
But-
you.
So the resolution in front of us is just to approve the code of conduct. I want to make an amendment that we've spoken to quite a bit within the code of conduct, and I'd just like to, through you, Madam Chair, to the clerk, ask how you would like me to do that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So just to kind of bookend the discussion that happened before the motion, and to John's point, if you look at 3.7.1, it says the Integrity Commissioner shall report to the complainant and the member no later than 90 days after the official receipt of the complaint. So to your question about would you, as a member, receive notification that the inquiry had concluded and there would be no findings of any contraventions, the member, yes, would receive notice of that from the Integrity Commissioner. But your amendment would be with respect to a report then being prepared by the Integrity Commissioner and submitted to council for council's information when the complaint is not sustained. So your amendment would be to section 3.7.6 of the complaints and inquiries procedure, and it would change it from reading where the complaint is not sustained, the Integrity Commissioner is not obligated to report to council. Instead, via amendment, it would read that the Integrity Commissioner shall report to council on the result of the inquiry.
And just to clarify, Mr. Clerk, if we just change that is not obligated to shall report, that is speaking only to those complaints where an investigation comes out of it.
Correct.
Okay, so my amendment, and I'm looking for a seconder, would be to amend 3.7.6 where we delete the word is not obligated on the first line, where the complaint is not sustained, and we're assuming that it is an investigation. When the complaint is not sustained, the Integrity Commissioner shall report to council on the result of the inquiry or any findings. And I guess take out the part where may do so at their own discretion. And I'm looking for a seconder, please, Mr. Clerk.
Do I have a seconder? Okay. I don't have a seconder for your amendment.
I guess I was lost due to lack of a seconder. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. So again, for the motion for the revised council code of conduct, is there any other questions or concerns?
I'll ask for a recorded vote, please.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Harris, a recorded vote, please.
I'd like to speak to it, please, Madam Chair, just quickly.
Certainly, go ahead.
Thank you. As I said before, I'm very proud of the fact that Ajax has been very proactive as far as having a code of conduct since 2004. Madam Chair, you and I were both part of that when this first started. And we were we might not have been the first, but I think we were one of the first in the province to bring this forward and hold ourselves to this higher standard. Since then, there's been a couple of amendments, and I think only to make it stronger. I think that we all really pride ourselves on trying to always do what's right. Sometimes, I'll speak for myself, I don't always say the right thing, but we're always trying to do the right thing. And I think accountability and transparency is incredibly important. And I will be supporting this, even though I have some very strong concerns that some may abuse. And I only say that because I have seen that in the last year and a half since this council took office. It is of significant cost to the taxpayer. And I just hope that if anybody is listening in my fan club, that they think not just in their, personal agenda, but think of the cost of the taxpayers to do this. If there is a complaint, I know I brought forward the notion of having a refundable deposit for any complaints to kind of put so everybody has a bit of skin in the game. That was voted down, but it's more about, if we're going to be accountable and transparent, we also have to be accountable and transparent to the taxpayers of the town of Ajax. And it's one thing to be accountable and transparent. It's another thing to run up a big bill doing that that's unsubstantiated. So I guess time will tell how this is going to play out. But I want to thank our staff, and I want to thank Mr. Mascarin for coming today and answering the questions. And I think Ajax, as always, are real leaders in this. I think this code of conduct is very strong. I think it is stronger than most of the other ones that are out there, including the regions. And, I'm happy to support it. Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments from any council members? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. On the resolution before the committee, please state your position in favor or opposed. Regional Councillor Lee,
In favor?
Councillor Bauer,
In favor?
Regional Councillor Crawford,
In favor?
Councillor Khan,
In favor?
Councillor Tyler Morin,
In favor?
Mayor Collier,
In favor.
Regional Councillor Dies.
In favor? That's carried. So before we move on to the next item on the agenda, I'd like to give you a 10-minute break, if that's okay. I'd like to give myself one so I can stretch a little bit before we get into the next segment of our agenda. I hope that's okay with everybody.
Can we move for a
Mhm.
5-minute break, Madam Chair?
If I run, yeah.
Okay, so move for a 5-minute break.
All right, then. Fine. Thank you.
We need a seconder and we need
No, we don't, I don't think, under the new rules. Oh, we haven't passed it.
They're not
We
passed
haven't
yet.
passed them at council, right? Okay, all in favor of a 5-minute break?
So
Yes.
Regional Councillor
Any
Crawford is
opposed?
seconding. And yeah.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
in favor. Okay, thank you.
That's
Good.
what I had to do.
Madam Chair, we are live again.
Thank you, and welcome back. Thank you for your patience, everybody. We're going to go to 4.2 on our agenda for the procedure bylaw updates. So, Mr. Harris, I think you have a little presentation for that.
Yes, thank you much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll keep this presentation relatively brief so we can just get to your questions. The town's procedure bylaw governs how business is conducted during meetings of council and its committees. Occasionally, amendments are required to ensure compliance with changing provincial legislation and to reflect updates to the practices of the town and council. In conducting this review, we examined recent changes to the Municipal Act. We researched and responded to direction that's been provided by council earlier this year on specific sections of the procedure bylaw. And we reviewed some best practices that we've observed elsewhere in the GTA and Durham region. As part of this update, we examined more specifically the rules for reconsideration votes, the notice of motion process, proxy voting, and various general improvements based on best practices. So I'll go through each of those areas now. So with respect to reconsideration, throughout this term of council, a number of previous council decisions or matters have been subject to reconsideration votes. A motion to reconsider requires 2/3 to pass, and once passed, council may then do any number of things with the original motion, altering it, for example, or even passing a completely different motion. Essentially, by reconsidering a previous motion, you open up the discussion again to do something different. It hasn't been much used prior to this term of council, but that really should not be too surprising, given that it's a new council with a lot of new faces, and there could be many previous council decisions that this council would be interested in re-examining, and even occasionally decisions that it's made earlier in the term that it might wish to reconsider. Our experience in legislative services in trying to apply the reconsideration rules as they're currently written is that the language is very broad and it provides very little direction about when reconsideration would be appropriate. So the revisions that we're proposing tonight will narrow the focus of reconsideration within the procedure bylaw so that it only deals with substantive resolutions that council has passed and only those that have been adopted by this council within this term of office. Anything that's been adopted by prior terms of council would not require a reconsideration motion and therefore the 2/3 vote to be reconsidered before council contemplates a new motion that might give a different direction than a previous council provided. Proxy voting is a new concept that was introduced quite recently when the province passed Bill 197 in July. It's actually quite similar to what you see at regional council with the alternate member, although it operates a bit differently. Essentially, if a member is going to be absent from a meeting, they could give their vote to another member to be cast on their behalf, essentially making that member their proxy. The legislation is somewhat vague in terms of how this would work in practice, and it merely says that if council wishes to use proxy voting, it must approve of it in your procedure law, and the municipal clerk is authorized in the legislation to develop the process for how that would work in practice. So if you are interested in this, it would be left to the role of the clerk to develop the appropriate procedures to govern how it would work. We've outlined this in the report, but we see some potential complicating factors for how proxy votes would operate in practice. And we listed a number of questions in the report that came to our minds in considering it. Just to give some examples, would the proxy holder, the person who carries the vote for someone else, have free reign over how to cast that vote? Or would the member who gives it to them have the ability to dictate how that vote is cast on different items? What would happen if, for example, an amendment is and the member who gave their proxy didn't provide any direction about how to vote on that amendment? What might happen or what might be the repercussions if a proxy holder votes against the wishes of the member who gave them their proxy, either inadvertently or otherwise? What might happen if a member had a conflict of interest that they weren't necessarily aware of or failed to disclose to their proxy holder, who then cast their vote on it? There are a lot of procedural questions around proxy votes that don't necessarily come up in the case of an alternate member at the region. We are a little cautious about this, and although it's been added to the Municipal Act, our recommendation at this point is not to implement it, but to observe where it will be implemented elsewhere in the GTA, see what best practices emerge from that, and determine whether it could have value for this council in the future. Now, with respect to the notice of motion process, we're directed back in June to examine potentially removing the ability to submit motions directly to the next council agenda. In the report, we refer to this as the 10-day rule. And that's because if a motion is submitted to legislative services 10 days before the meeting, it can be printed in the agenda right then and there without requiring notice at a previous meeting first. This is outlined in the report, but we've done some background work on the history of this provision in terms of how it applies in Ajax. It's found in procedure bylaws for the town going back to 1994. And in looking around the GTA at how motions are brought to other councils, it's pretty much consistent with the majority of other municipalities. They have their own versions of this type of provision, whether it's 10 days, 7 days, usually a deadline or a cutoff whereby a member can submit a motion to go directly to a council agenda. The rule itself was re-examined in 2015 when we moved to the monthly meeting cycle for council. It used to be a much shorter time period because we published agendas only 3 days before the actual meeting. Moving that back to 6 days, we then adjusted the rule to be 10 days to give a decent buffer of time for a final motion to be submitted before the agenda is published. So in looking at it and in looking what others do and how it works in practice, we're recommending keeping it. We foresee some issues if it were removed, namely that there are a number of motions that council members bring that are very time sensitive. Quite a few of them could not necessarily wait between a month to give notice at one meeting and then be brought forward at the next. And what we could foresee happening in those cases is that we would have many more motions that are brought to council without notice and therefore requiring a rule suspension and a 2/3 vote to get onto the agenda. And that would undermine council's ability to see that motion in advance and understand what it contains and be able to respond to it on the floor. And it could present a real barrier to members to actually getting their motions onto an agenda at a council meeting for discussion if they require a 2/3 vote to be brought. So we find that the 10-day rule still offers a very valid avenue for motions to be brought to council. It's the most frequent, if not almost the ubiquitous way that met to council, and we're recommending keeping it for those reasons. And lastly, there are a number of administrative improvements and language clarity changes throughout the bylaw. I've listed some on the slide here, and they're listed out in the report. I won't go through each one, but we can have a conversation about them if you have any questions. And with that, we're happy to take those questions.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not used to muting it. Okay, Councillor Lee, please, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. So through the chair to the clerk, my question is regarding the deferral motion procedure of now you're allowed debating it, whereas before and currently at the region, anytime a deferral motion is put forth, you can ask for a time and date, and that kind of generally ends discussion. I don't, have a strong opinion one way or the other. I'm just wondering why would that rule have existed for so long and through different tiers of government for us to change it now? So what's the purpose of only saying time and date?
So through you, Madam Chair, to Regional Councillor Lee, it's an interesting question. I think it goes back to probably a bit of Robert's Rules of Order about deferral and referral motions and postponing. What you see at the region is kind of a two-tier structure. If the deferral or referral doesn't have any instructions, then it's not debatable. But as soon as there are instructions applied, for example, directing staff to investigate something, then it becomes debatable. And essentially, the difference is in the first case, it's almost more of an administrative motion. You're just dealing with pushing that question down the line to a later date, or referring it to another body, perhaps a committee, to investigate further. And in the latter case, you're dealing with substance. In terms of why we're recommending this change, what we have observed over the last couple years is that this council will defer items or refer them to a future meeting, but a discussion will happen before that motion is brought that essentially explains the reasons for why a deferral might be necessary or appropriate in that circumstance anyway. So there's a debate that's happening and a discussion about the merits of a deferral. or a referral, regardless of whether there are instructions. And that debate almost instantaneously ceases the moment the motion is brought. So the discussion happens first, and then the motion happens at the very end. So it's a bit of splitting hairs. We think it's easier to simply say these are debatable motions because, quite frankly, you are debating them. You're just doing it before the motion's being made.
Right. Okay. Chair, I'm going to introduce an amendment to 6.19. This is in regards to correspondence. My motion or my amendment would say, a motion with respect to any item of correspondence shall be in order, provided it moved and seconded, with the exception that a motion to endorse an item of correspondence shall be out of order if this correspondence was sent by a member to an external party. I'm looking for a seconder, and then I can explain the rationale behind it.
Oh, can you repeat that for me once more?
Sure. So 6.19,
Mhm.
6.19, sorry. A motion with respect to any item of correspondence shall be in
Right.
order, provided it moved and seconded, with the exception that a motion to endorse an item of correspondence shall be out of order if the correspondence was sent by a member to an external party. So I guess firstly, I need a seconder on this.
Anybody have any questions or
Sorry, Chair,
comments?
Can you
Okay,
say it one more time, please?
Sure. A motion with respect to any item of correspondence shall be in order, provided it is moved and seconded, with the exception that a motion to endorse an item of correspondence shall be out of order if the correspondence was sent by a member to an external party.
I'll second it.
I think
And
I
then
got it. Okay.
And I'll kind of explain it. So thank you, Regional Councillor Crawford. So may I speak on that, Chair?
Yes, you may.
So this is regarding correspondence, and we're starting to see an influx of letters, which are the code of conduct or this procedure bylaw says is fine. But what I'm hoping this prevents is allowing letters we send to a minister, to a constituent, and then being endorsed by council as a position of council, trumping the motion process. So ultimately, this prevents us from endorsing our own letters that we send, because by endorsing it, it becomes a position of council. And then by becoming a position of council, we're not going through the proper debate and everything that goes through motion. So Mayor Collier called me out on this with the letter of support that Councillor Bauer and I sent in support of parents with autistic children. And he was absolutely right. And I realized that I had screwed up, to be very blunt. And so this just kind of closes that ability. So we can still send letters, and we can even receive them for information. But the minute we start sending letters to whoever and then endorsing them or moving to endorse them, it trumps the motions, it trumps notice of motions. That becomes your will of council. So I just want to kind of close that little hole so that if we want to, any seven of us want to put forth a policy that they want endorsed by council, it goes through the motion process.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question on this, please?
Certainly.
I'm actually sorry, Councilor Lee. Can you tell? I'm looking on page 121 right now, 6.19. I'm trying to find the section you're referring to.
6.19, just right now it says a motion directing staff to undertake certain action is crossed off. And right now it says motion with respect to any item of correspondence shall be in order, provided it is moved and seconded. I've added the next part that more or less says, with the exception that the motion to endorse an item of correspondence be out of order if the correspondence is sent by a member to an external party.
So I just thank you for that clarification. I have a question to the clerk.
Thank you, clerk.
With regards to, and I'll use an example, is the letter that I sent to Dorsey Development regarding the what was it called? The request for the minister's order for the conversion on the white belt lands. I sent that letter that letter again became part of correspondence on the regional agenda and on the Ajax agenda, and was then endorsed by Ajax Council.
I don't think it was endorsed, Mayor.
It was, well, I thought it was.
No, I believe,
pretty
if I'm
sure
not
it was.
mistaken, Councillor Tyler Moore in that meeting had pulled it and asked a question regarding it, but there was no actual move to endorse it.
So it was
Councillor Tyler Moore can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll ask the clerk to clarify that, please.
Yeah, we'll need clarification. I do remember pulling it, but was that almost like a
I'm
mistake?
pretty sure it was endorsed.
Was that clerical though? Did we miss? Does anybody have the minutes or?
We can pull the minutes if you'll give us a second.
Can you clarify that? Because I'm pretty certain that was endorsed.
Please bear with us for one moment.
No problem.
So I have pulled up the minutes from the special council meeting of July 27th, 2020, and you should see a motion there moved by Councillor Tyler Moore and seconded by Councillor Khan.
Oh, I apologize.
That it be
Sorry, I didn't.
It was endorsed, Mayor. I apologize.
I didn't hear it. It cut out. So, wondering.
It was endorsed. I carried.
Wondering, to be looked at, and Councillor Lee, I appreciate that you recognize that. I think what you and Councillor Bauer tried to do with that autism motion, and I did tell you better than.
I'm sorry, Mayor, you're cutting out.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. The technology is awesome when except for when it's not. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. I do appreciate, I asked for this to be looked at because of that letter, and the reason why is because the letter came across to the minister as an official position of council, which it was not. Once it was endorsed, then it was. But I thought that a motion was a better way to do it. But when I send a letter, it is on behalf of council because I am the head of council and speak for council. So if we pass this amendment, that makes a big change to, if I send a letter to a minister like I did regarding the Carruthers, which was then subsequently endorsed, this would make it that could not happen.
Can I clarify based on the current report in front of us with the clerk then? Is when the mayor sends something as the head of council, does that necessarily reflect the full will of council? Because based when I was reading the procedure bylaw updates, I wasn't sure it did.
So through you, Madam Chair, to answer the question as succinctly as I can, one of the duties of the mayor as the head of council is to represent the will of council and communicate that. But it also must reflect positions that council has taken itself, right? Either through motions that it's passed in previous meetings or resolutions that it's adopted.
Right. So when I sent a letter in opposition to the
MZO
zoning order request, that was in line with a previously approved council resolution on that topic.
So sorry to interrupt, Mayor Collier. Is that would that be, or clerk, would that have been true? Because ultimately, if I'm not mistaken, we had never voted on an MZO. So how could the position have been taken?
So council or previous councils have taken positions on the development question on the Carruthers Creek that reflect all of the statements of opposition that would have been included in Mayor Collier's letter at the time. So it's not on the MZO specifically, but it was reflecting the will of council insofar as previous councils have objected to that particular development proposal.
And just to add, Mr. Clerk, until this council changes any resolutions passed by the old council, they stand.
That's correct.
But hypothetically, if the mayor, for example, had regarding Carruthers, had said specifically, it is council's position that we oppose a ministerial zoning order, which ultimately it is. Don't get me wrong; it would have been the position of council. Would that have been fair to have been said if we had never? You're right, Carruthers. I wouldn't disagree. We're on board of no development there, but specifically in terms of an MZO or future MZOs and how, those are to be handled.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure I'm in a position to speculate on that kind of scenario. I think it's very fair to say that previous councils have taken a strong position on that development project, and the MZO that was proposed in relation to that obviously would have been in opposition to the positions that previous councils have taken towards development in that area. As to whether or not a specific motion would have been required to state that council opposed an MZO, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say one way or the other. It's a hypothetical.
So I guess the reason for this amendment ultimately is, should we allow ourselves, not even positions of council, right? It's, if I were to write a letter to Doug Ford saying, I think there should be no PST, right? Something ridiculous like that. And it didn't go through the proper motion process, and it comes back to council, and we then vote on that. That seems like completely circumventing the process of submitting a motion. I could write a letter to anybody as long as I copy the town of Ajax, pull it, and get everything endorsed. If that's the case, then why do we need motions? So I'm saying ultimately with this amendment, we can pull our own correspondence and just receive information. But if we want a position endorsed, we go through the 10-day or 3/5, get a motion on the floor, have it debated, and then that'll be the position of council. Otherwise, what could hypothetically happen is, anytime there is a motion from any of us, one of us 7 could just write a letter to whomever, include that in correspondence, and then that will trump whatever official motion and all the work that went into putting an official motion together.
I guess, well, first point of order, I think I filled the floor.
Apologies, sorry.
But I think I understand what you're trying to do, Councillor Lee, and I get it. But I'm just trying to point out that we have to be careful not to limit me as head of council in moving forward with things when I have to, as far as them being time sensitive, like that letter to Dorsey regarding the Carruthers development, the Carruthers Headwaters development. When I send a letter, I do speak on behalf of council. When councillors send a letter to the minister making requests, in this case that you brought up, it was deemed as a position of council when it was not a position of council. I understand what your amendment is trying to do, but I'm just saying it's different. So we can't have an amendment that's going to tie my hands as far as dealing with the town and correspondence. So I'm trying to, I guess, ask the clerk for a way to achieve what you're trying to do, Councillor Lee, but also not tie the mayor's hands as far as dealing with sensitive matters that are time sensitive.
Councillor Crawford has a question.
Yeah, I think.
Well, actually, I need an answer from the clerk, please, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I think as a general principle, it's far superior to have motions as they're able to more clearly articulate what council's position is on a subject. I think that maybe the risk with having letters endorsed after they've been sent is the cart coming before the horse a little bit in terms of the order of things, right? I still think, in terms of the mayor's role, representing council and the municipality and dealing with time-sensitive issues, I don't think that this necessarily would tie your hands in your capacity that way. But what it would do is it would force motions to come to council if there was an interest in getting a position from council collectively, um, that maybe even perhaps goes beyond what was included in any letter or correspondence. So it's a matter of what's the appropriate stream, right? And what's the cleanest way for council to take an official position. I don't necessarily think that there's anything fundamentally limiting about doing it by way of a letter, but I also think it's superior to have motions instead. They are cleaner, they're more articulate, they generally have a bit more kind of thought that goes into them in presentation, and they represent council better.
Okay, just to finish, I mean, I'm not opposed to the amendment. I don't know that it's necessary, but I'm not opposed to the amendment. Like, I can still write any letters I want on behalf of council and send to whoever. It just means that they can't be endorsed through correspondence. That's the only thing here, which really is not really relevant. So I'm not overly concerned about it. I just want to clarify. Thank you, Ms. Clerk.
Regional
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Crawford, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought that the only thing that was trying to be said here is that the correspondence, like the mayor just said, was not to be the tool to endorsing a position of council at a meeting. That there's no one's tying the hands from anybody sending a letter at all, but that it shouldn't be included in the agenda and then endorsed, especially if there's already a motion on the agenda, which comes later on in the agenda. So it kind of, it trumps the actual work that's been done. So I was just clarifying, it's already been clarified, but that's all I was doing.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to clarify, this is just for letters or pieces of correspondence that members put forward to be endorsed. We could submit information to be received. Still, this has got nothing to do with our letters that we send, that we want to receive for information. This is only for items that are to be endorsed, which could be a letter that someone sends, but then at the appropriate time takes that content, turns it into a motion, and then presents it during motion. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, if you're asking me, the mover, then that was the intent of this, is that ultimately, yes, you have a letter, you receive information, and then it ties right into your motion that I assume you've been working on in conjunction with your letter that you had sent.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Collier, do you want to say something?
Just to further, I mean, there are times when, for just, it's just necessary just to deal with something and not practical to have to go to council for a motion. I get, I'm not thinking it's not that big of a deal. I'm just thinking that comes where I've had to do something on behalf of the town. It will be included as correspondence if this motion passes, if this amendment passes, but can't be endorsed. I guess if that, on the rare opportunity that may ever happen, it would become necessary to bring forward walk-on motion with 2/3 to make that a council position. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, that is a reasonable path to resolve that.
Is that smart government, Mr. Clerk, in your opinion? Is that a good thing to do?
I think it's a way to resolve time-sensitive issues that council needs to take a position on before it has an opportunity to meet to do that collectively. It's not something that I think should necessarily happen on a regular basis, but I think it makes sense to stream it that way in those particular cases.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? So I have amendment moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Crawford. And I'm going to call all in favor.
Sure.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's carried.
And then, Madam Chair, my second amendment was just that we send our updated council policy to the local MP and local MPP, and just so they know what our policies are.
So that would just be a friendly then, I take it, Mr. Harris?
Clerk?
You can vote on it if you like, or if you're comfortable with that, it could be a friendly as well. We're happy to circulate.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
I have questions, please, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mayor Collier?
Thank you. Let me find them here now. Council Lee brought up a good point regarding the deferral motions, and I don't support that. I think that, well, first of all, I'm going to, before I let me find the section, because I got back deep into it looking up 6.19. So the deferral or referral motions that are debatable, I'm going to move that section, and it's hard for me to move this and get a seconder if I can't speak to it. So I asked somebody to second it to get it on the floor, but I'm going to ask that we do not have that portion that makes deferral matters be debatable. And I ask for a seconder, and then I will speak to it and explain.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can we
just
please know
for-
that
and-
section?
Page 106.
I'm not. That's just
Thank
it. I'm not sure of the section, Councillor Bauer.
Page 106 says Regional Councillor Lee.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Madam Chair. Just when the clerk spoke of Roger's rules of procedure, I think one of the things that we need to do here is to maintain uniformity. And by us making this change, that puts us out of uniformity with the region. And I don't know about others. It doesn't matter about other municipalities. But for the four of us that also serve at the regional level, having different rules in Ajax versus different rules at the region is mentally problematic, I'll put it. Trying to keep things straight, trying to chair meetings and having different sets of rules here versus different sets of rules there, because I do chair meetings at the other venue as well, is problematic. I think the whole point of referring or deferring the motion is you're sort of kicking it down the field, you're sending it back for further consideration, and commenting on that motion that you're sending back is kind of redundant. Like, why are you commenting on something that you're sending back for change? Why are you commenting on something that you're deferring to a later time? You'll have the option to comment and make all your statements at that time, and probably on a different motion. So any comments that you might make today while a matter is being referred or deferred probably won't be relevant when it comes back to the table. And I think that's why they have this, that those are not debatable. And I just don't want to see us get bogged down in procedure on things that really I don't think are relevant at the time. That's why they have it. That's why we've always, in my 17 years on council, have abided by it. And to change that now, I think would put us out of the norm with regards to the region. And I think we should be consistent. So that's why I bring forward this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? I'm sorry, Councillor Tyler Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to be clear, when an item is being debated at the region, and somebody requests that that item be deferred, or that motion be deferred, the conversation stops. The chair in this section, in John Henry, says, okay, no further questions, we're going to defer it. And to Mayor Collier's point, sometimes we can go on for an hour or two on an item that, so that's the way it works at the region. And right now at the local, sorry if I'm being remedial, I just want clarity. Right now at the municipal level, at our municipal level, if there's the same scenario, we do continually debate it, comment on it, even though someone is asking to defer it. Is that correct?
No, actually, right now, there is no debate on the matter. Although sometimes at the discretion of the chair, we do allow it.
That's what I'm referring to. But if this, okay. All right, I think I got it. Thank you.
Is there anything further?
I would just like to ask the clerk, Madam Chair, quickly.
Sure.
So if this amendment passes, it is still the discretion of the chair to allow debate on a deferral motion if they choose. Question mark.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't think we have anything in the current bylaw or in what's proposed to kind of give that flexibility. I think it's not specified in the procedure bylaw, but if a chair is willing to allow it and members are willing to entertain it, I see no issue with being a little bit flexible in terms of the authorities of the chair to do that. In my mind, that's a hallmark of a good governance relationship where the chair is able to make those types of decisions and members are agreeable to them to facilitate discussion. Our purpose in recommending this was simply to align what the procedure bylaw says with what we observe is happening in the meetings. And to your point, that is essentially what is happening. Is occasionally the chair will say, okay, let's talk a bit about it, even though debate should have ended on this topic. If members are more comfortable leaving that up to the discretion of the chair and simply removing these changes from the proposed procedure bylaw, that does not concern us greatly. We're happy to work with them.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And that's exactly what I was getting at with this amendment is, and I'll just bring everybody to, I think, 2 council meetings ago where I did exercise that discretion and did allow debate on a deferral motion. Just to clarify and point out some things, it is something that we still can do, but I don't think we want to get into a regular pattern of doing this, and I don't want it to be part of our policy. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? So, Mayor Collier, you're going to bring forward an amendment on that?
I did bring forward an amendment.
So can you read the wording again, please?
Oh, boy. Well, that's the problem. I couldn't find it in the actual policy. I'm asking for the clerk to point out the correct place where basically it's the procedural bylaw is saying that now these motions can be debated. It's therefore proposed that any motion to defer or refer a matter with or without further direction would be debatable. And I would just ask the clerk to point out where in the policy and that be changed, not be debatable. So it just remain as is.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So the sections you would be looking for are in 10.8 and 10.9 of the proposed procedure bylaw. And the amendment would basically be to remove the proposed changes with respect to deferral and referral motions.
Thank you.
Okay. So are you going to, Mr. Clerk, write up that amendment for a vote then?
Would you
So
like
everybody's clear? Yes, please.
You'll bear with us.
So 10.8. So that
I'm
the
just looking at 10.8, and it's just a matter of leaving 10.8.4 in rather than striking it out.
That's correct.
I thought this would be so simple.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think what we have on screen should satisfy that.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can't see it. Could you read it, please, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, certainly. It reads that the proposed revisions to section 10.8 and 10.9 of the procedure bylaw to make motions to defer and refer debatable be removed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or concerns from members? No? So all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
It's carried. Thank you. Any opposed? No. All right.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on, or sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies. Moving on.
No problem.
I have no issues with the motions to consider. My one thing regarding notice of motion, and the reason why I asked this to be brought forward, I'm fine with the 10-day period. I'm fine with it remaining. All I ask is, and the reason why I requested this be looked at is, unless you download the agenda and read it on the day it's issued, you don't know if any new motions are in there potentially. So under on page 102, notice of motion process. So item 2, by delivering a written copy of motion to the clerk 10 days before the meeting at which the motion will be considered, I'm fine with that. All I ask is that, and again, I'm not sure, Mr. Clerk, where in the procedural bylaw this needs to go, but just the wording, and that council be circulated. And I don't know that that needs to be an amendment. That could be friendly, but my intent of having this, I will move an amendment if required, but that was my intent, was just, again, if the agenda comes out, unless you pull it offline immediately and read it immediately, you don't get that 10 days notice. And for some of us, and I'll speak for me specifically, I have a ridiculous amount of reading to do most weeks, and often I don't actually get to an agenda till 2 or 3 days before the actual meeting. And that's just the way it works. So really, sometimes, unless you get distribution of the motion, you might only get 3 days in my case. So if we can in some way just add the wording that I have no problem with the 10-day provision, but that councillors distribute their motion to council at the same time, I think that will suffice. Does that require an amendment, or can we just do a friendly with that?
I believe that would require an amendment.
What section would that require to be amended, Mr. Clerk?
So the most relevant section would be 6.28.2, which is the actual 10-day rule in the proposed procedure bylaw. I just hesitate to add as well that council has also given some direction to the CAO's office to update the communications policy as well. That was part of the motion that this rule was re-examined under from June. It's entirely possible that they could also speak to communications about motions and might resolve this without having to do it through the procedure bylaw. But if you do want to do it through the procedure bylaw, then you would be adding the words "and members of council" after the word "clerk" in 6.28.2.
And I will move that amendment, please, Mr. Clerk, under item 6.28.2, to add the word "and to members of council" after "delivered to the clerk." So delivered to clerk and distributed to members of council not later than noon, 10 days prior to the date of the meeting at which the motion is to be introduced and debated. And looking for a seconder, please.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Khan?
Can you,
Thank you, Councillor Khan. I'll just speak to it quickly. Actually, I have spoken to it. It's just a matter of, again, unless you download it on the day and read it on the day, you're not getting that 10 days advance notice. So just a matter of courtesy. I always do when I introduce a motion, I actually distribute it to council in advance of distributing it to the clerk and ask for feedback in advance. And that's all I'm asking for, is that the same consideration be applied for all motions brought forward. So
what page is this on?
that's all I need to say about it. Thank you.
Sorry, Mayor. What page is this on?
122, Rob.
Thank you,
122.
So if I may, I have a question of the clerk.
There it is.
So in drafting a motion, like things do come up and we can't wait a whole month. So we draft the motion, but sometimes it has to go to more than one department, which delays the process. So you're not, your intentions are good to get it out as soon as possible, but it doesn't always happen. So how is that? Is that something that communications is looking at then, sort of fast tracking that process?
So through you, Madam Chair, you are correct. The process to write a motion is sometimes an arduous one and sometimes requires the input of a lot of different departments to make sure that it reflects language that staff can support and that council can support. The CAO's office is working on guidelines and procedures to help kind of improve that process. Our experience has been typically that members are able to meet the 10-day rule generally, and I guess the trick to it is to get started early, because the more you unpack a motion and the more you write it, the more you find different sides to it and perspectives that staff and other members might bring to the table and help kind of expand your understanding of it. So I think that's a matter of being prepared and looking ahead. And generally speaking, our experience has been that we do get the motion in a final state by the 10 days.
Regional Councillor Lee. You're muted.
Yeah. So presumably then this would affect walk-ons as well. Like even if I wanted to walk it on, I'd have to send it to everyone first and not just surprise everyone. We're agreeing with that as well? To the mover.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Actually, no, that's not what I'm speaking to at all. The walk-on motions require 2/3, and that's not what I'm speaking to at all. I'm just saying that if your motion is complete and you can email it to the clerk, just also email it to council. And so we have it in advance. That's all. I'm not speaking to walk-on motions at all. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Tyler Moran? You had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Harris, Clerk Harris, could you speak to why we wouldn't want this? Like, is there a don't tell each other about the motion, or no?
Pardon?
But do you understand my question?
I believe I do, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Tyler Morin. So this puts an onus on members of council in terms of distributing it to each other in addition to the clerk. From a procedure perspective, there's nothing that makes this difficult or necessarily a higher bar. From a practical perspective, when you send the motion to us, put council as the CC and you're done. I don't think it's necessarily too difficult from that perspective. The only reason it may not be desired is it's an extra step on the process, but that's it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So do you want to just read out your amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Bauer, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to the mover, please explain to me again why you need a motion earlier than the agenda. Why is it not acceptable? Because we don't get the agenda until less than 10 days prior to the meeting, and we don't know what's in the agenda till we get it and read it, which would include any motions that's in there. So there's no pre-known, if that's a word, information in the agenda. So I'm not sure why a motion, and I'm not saying anything, like I'm happy to share. I think we should have open discussion about our emotions and talk to each other, and because we can make them better perhaps, or look at different perspectives. I'm just wondering, we don't know any of the content of our agendas until we download them and read them. So what's the difference for the motion?
I'm gladly answer that. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bauer. I do things a certain way. And when I do a motion, I send it to council in advance before it gets sent to the clerk. Council has the opportunity to look at the motion and get back to me and provide comments. And that way, hopefully, if I get comments, I can make a change. And so when the motion comes to the floor, we're not worried about amending or whatever. I've incorporated those comments. That's not always possible, but that's the intent. I'm just suggesting that, if you're sending a motion to the clerk to be included in the agenda, just as a courtesy to fellow councilors, copy them on it. It's not really advance notice. I mean, I'm not asking everybody to do what I do and put it out a few days in advance and get and circulate and get comments, although that would be preferable. All
Sure.
I'm asking is that the same courtesy, if it's ready, I don't see any issue with copying council on it at the same time, just so we have it, just so we're aware, because as I said, and I'll use myself specifically, very honestly, I do not have the time with the number of meetings and agendas I have to read it 10 days in advance. Often I only get to it 2 or 3 days in advance. And that, if it's not circulated, if I get it in an email, great, then I have it, then we're aware, off we go. But otherwise, it just is a problem. And I'm just asking that it be, again, as the clerk said, it's just a matter of adding council in this CC portion when you click send to the clerk. It's not a massive thing. It's more of a consideration type thing.
Sure. We're trying to be courteous of each other.
It's not about advance notice. It's about, when you send it to the clerk, if you don't have time to distribute it beforehand, send it at the same time. That way we're up to date.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or concerns? Okay. So, do you have a wording for your amendment, Mayor Collier?
Yeah, just to amend item section 6.28.2, just to add the words after delivered to the clerk and copy council not later than noon, 10 days prior to the date of the meeting at which the motion is to be introduced and debated. So just adding the words and distribute to council.
Okay.
After the word clerk.
Okay, so 6.28.2 to add after it's delivered to the clerk and distribute to council.
Yeah.
Does that sound right, Mr. Harris?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay. All right. Are there any, does anyone want to speak to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
That's carried.
Thank you. And just finally, just to close it out, Madam Clerk, I support everything else that's in there. I am happy to see that staff has not suggested proxy voting. I especially don't think that's necessary given now the change to the Municipal Act to allow electronic. Everything else I think is excellent in this, and just thank you to staff and everybody for putting this together. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about section 5.10, which is on page 116. The appointment of alternate member to upper tier council, and that no more than one alternate member may be appointed during the term of council. Can we change that? Or is that in an act somewhere? Is that mandatory?
That's
Could
the
we have?
Municipal Act.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Bauer, that is a Municipal Act requirement. There can only be one alternate member.
Okay.
Per term.
Okay, fine, thank you. No more questions.
Okay. Anybody have any further questions on the procedural bylaw? All right, so we have voted and approved the 2 amendments. So the recommendation that the revised procedure bylaw included as attachment 1 to this report be approved by council as amended. All in favor?
Sorry, who's moving this?
I'll move it.
I moved it.
Okay, just make sure.
Or I'll
I
second
think
it.
I
I
thought we
moved
had a
it
seconder.
and somebody seconded
I
it.
thought it was Ash.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much. All right. There are no presentations or reports. So can I have a mover and a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Okay, all in favor? Any
Yeah.
opposed? That's carried. And thank you very much to all of our staff.
Yeah, great job.
Yes, thank you.